everyone. It's July 9th, and this is 508, a podcast about Worcester.
And this is Tina Zlody, candidate for Worcester City Council, challenger. This is Michael Benedetti. I'm the host of 508, co-host Brendan Melkin. Hi, Brendan.
What's happening?
This is the first of our hopefully long series of interviews with Worcester City Council challengers. We have been talking about the questions that we want to ask them over the last few shows. We've got a short list of questions. All of them are issue-based. None of them have anything to do with the horse race aspect, the strategy aspect of campaigning. One of them, as traditionally, involves the wire. We're going to ask the same questions of every candidate, and we're going to find out what they have to say. This week we have a disclosure, which is that Brendan is the treasurer of Tina's campaign.
And sometimes she calls me up and asks me questions, but thankfully I didn't actually read any of the questions other than discussing them with you 2 or 3 weeks ago. I didn't actually look at what you planned on asking, so I wasn't able to give her a heads up on anything.
All right, so this week, that's pretty weird. I, on the other hand, have nothing to do with this campaign. Have not given Tina any money. Have not worked on anything.
I haven't given her a red cent either.
I possibly have liked something on Facebook. I don't know whether I've done that or not. Tina, how are you doing?
I'm good. Excellent.
Why are you running for city council?
There's a number of reasons I'm running for city council, Mike, but to start with, Worcester really is in dire need of change, and we're in dire need of moving our economy forward, thinking outside the box, just being more creative in how Worcester sees itself. And secondly, I'm running because there need to be more women in politics, and I'm hoping maybe my run will inspire some college student that I deal with on a daily basis to think about a political future or how they can impact the city that they live in.
How have you been active in public life in Worcester up until this campaign?
Well, not much. I kid. I founded Start on the Street with a group of people, which is Central Massachusetts' largest arts and cultural festival, which we do 2 events in the city, which bring approximately 50,000+ people to Park Ave, and then at least 5,000 or 6,000 people to Union Station for a handcrafted arts and music event. I've been on the Arts Council for 6 years. I've been the chair for the last 2. I've been on the board of the Bijou Cinema, and that's some of the things I've done.
So, is there anything in particular that made you say this is the year to run? This is the year to switch gears from?
Yeah, I think ultimately the frustration at the fact that I liken us to Sisyphus, that we continue to roll that boulder up that hill and it just keeps coming back down again, and at some point we have to hit the tipping point. And I think that with all of the change in the things that are happening downtown, things that are happening in Maine South, that it was just time to step up to the plate and maybe make Worcester move forward.
So you talked a little bit previously about economic development, and one of the questions is, where would the jobs come from that would keep more of our high school and college graduates in the city, and what is the council's role in creating those jobs?
I would say that if we continue to promote small businesses in the city and have them expand, that would expand our job base.
Okay.
And we would then be able to take in interns, like Amy Chase takes in interns from high schools and colleges, and that gives them an opportunity to learn about what she does. And that's a way to create more jobs in the city. I'm not sure necessarily what the city council's role would be, other than to encourage, businesses to open up in the city and hire people from the city to work in those businesses.
What kind of? You know a lot about how the city runs, regulations and things, just from doing Start on the Street and dealing with 1 million permits a couple times a year. Do you have a sense of the kinds of things that are standing in the way of more small business in Worcester?
I think the frustration that I've heard from the small business owners that I've spoken to who have opened up, just the permitting processes, not getting the right information from the right offices, things not being laid out smoothly for them, and almost a lack of welcoming.
Okay.
More of a suspicion. So what are you opening here? Why are you doing that? I feel like they didn't feel it was a friendly environment, or an environment that gave them correct information when they needed it in a timely fashion. So we need to smooth that process. We need to streamline it. And we also need to invite investors to come to Worcester to invest in our properties, so that when they do invest in a property, a small business person can go, hey, I just saw this got renovated and I've always wanted to open up a store here. How do I go about doing that? And having someone in the city be able to walk them through the process and encourage them, not just stodgily walk them through, encourage them to be here.
I want to ask another question, which is, this is kind of my pet question. do we have enough housing in Worcester? And again, what should the city council do about it?
So I guess my question would be, what kind of housing are we talking about? Are we talking like reasonable rent housing for, low-income, mid-income people? High, like what are you asking about?
Well, I guess I'm asking you, that's part of the reason that the question is, do we have enough housing? Like, we've seen, for example, city council resolutions in recent weeks, like asking, are there some neighborhoods that have too much housing? Are there some neighborhoods that are saturated with housing? Whether that's conflicting with sort of where the city thinks that neighborhood should go, or it's just conflicting with some infrastructure in that neighborhood, is not clear to me. But I guess different people have different ideas of how much housing we should have, how much, what kinds of housing we should have. And I guess I'm just asking you,
okay,
how do you look at that?
Well, I will say I spent about an hour and a half this week with Steve Teasdale, who's the head of the Maine South CDC. And we went through sort of the housing things that are happening in Maine South. And right now, I think they've got a great amount of housing down there. So, and I think that for them having enough housing down there right now, maybe what we need to look at in the neighborhood is maker spaces, live work spaces for artists. So changing the dynamic of the question, do we need to change what type of housing we're offering people? I think we have right now great low and mid-income housing in the city in different neighborhoods, over in Green Street, I think in Maine South, but I would like to change the question and the dynamic is, do we have the right type of housing to keep people in the city that we want to have in the city? People who are going to do maker spaces, artist live work spaces, then again, using that as a way to propel the economy, the creative economy. You will get someone in an artist live workspace who will then start a retail store. I mean, it needs to progress past just housing. But I do think, and then we can work into housing and, there's a lot of people on the common that obviously have mental health issues and have drug abuse issues, and where are they living and what are we doing to help them? Do we have enough drug treatment programs? Do we have enough places to move them into temporary places in order to move them into permanent places? Mm-hmm. So it becomes an even broader conversation.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess both of those are questions which are close to my heart. Because I know that whenever you talk about live workspaces, that if you want to be legit, there are a lot of zoning you can quickly run into zoning problems as far as how many people are in a building, what kind of activities are they doing in a building, and obviously there is these laws are there because of those things causing problems of you're in an apartment, your neighbor in the next apartment opens, a machine shop, and now you can't sleep, and it's terrible. Or you're in an apartment, your neighbor in the next apartment invites 30 people to live there, now you can't sleep, everything smells terrible, it's not good. But I think that those regulations also do, sometimes accidentally stand in the way of doing things which are not going to hurt anybody's quality of life and are going to let people do creative and interesting things.
Which then increases the quality of the life of everybody living in the city of Worcester.
Yeah. I feel like everybody's always happy with the more artists or whatever there are in the city. But yeah, the question of where is that? I don't know. How do you integrate that in with the existing space? I guess is the question.
Well, I mean, you could take one of those beautiful buildings in Maine South, and this is what Steve and I were looking at the other day, was, all right, you've got a huge section of space that's just live space, but you have all these other places that are far enough set back and far away that's what they would be marketed as. It wouldn't be marketed as, hey, Brendan, you and Iris come live in here with your son, and then we're going to have Josh Swaylett come in with all of his equipment to do forging, mm-hmm. and have you guys live next to each other. No, how about Josh Swaylett comes in and then talks to his friend who's also doing, woodworking, and have them share a place or live in the same building. Yeah. You would have like-minded people working and living together. It wouldn't just be throwing things into a pile and trying to make it work out. It would literally be structured for this type of an environment.
It does seem like things are actually working out. I mean, I can only look at Worcester over maybe the last 12 years. Mm-hmm. That it seems like there were times maybe 5 or 10 years ago when you had these different co-op galleries or other sort of spaces being shut down by the city or being shut down by worried landlords. And now it seems like there is more makerspace stuff going on, or things like Stone Soup going on,
sure,
which are both legit, which are legit and also doing these creative things, and also not getting running into legal issues or landlord issues.
Right, and that's fantastic, but we need to take it to the next step. We need to take it to the next level. We need to have developers come in here and start creating these spaces for these people to go, and we're losing people. We're losing artists to Lowell. People are going to Lowell because they're creating the spaces in which they can live in and work in, where they can be makers. I mean, nothing against Lowell, but if we're losing people to Boston, Providence, and Lowell for these reasons, we need to look at that.
And so you do feel like that's an issue where there needs to be, city councilors like walking the neighborhoods with developers being like, you know what, it would be great if you did this, it would be great if you did this, or do you feel like it is about zoning and ordinances and things?
I think it's
or?
about both. I think that the city council should have a voice in something like that. I think that they should want to bring a developer in and go, hey, we've got this over here, we've got this over here. And I don't mean just looking at downtown. We need to broaden our spectrum to other neighborhoods, other areas. We have so many amazing factory buildings here. We've got a beautiful space on Pullman Street. I understand it's going to take a lot to renovate it. I understand it's not in the hub of the city, but why does everything have to be downtown? I don't think it does. But that Pullman Street is an amazing space that could probably house like 30 to 50 artists. You could drive a dump truck in there.
Like they could, there would be live workspace for 30 to 50 people.
Why not? It's enormous. You could literally drive a truck up on the second floor and all through the whole place. That's how big it is, and that's the kind of stuff we need to look at. We need to look at large scale. And inviting artists in, and inviting them into spaces.
And don't let them go to Lowell. You say we shouldn't diss Lowell. We can diss Lowell.
Okay,
that's
all right.
fine. This isn't a show about Lowell.
Just didn't want to be rude. So.
Worcester artist Greg Hamilton is walking behind you there.
Mike, we'll call Tina done on this one because I just had a couple thoughts I need to get off my head too. That it strikes me that in the last couple of years, these are conversations that the city council has participated in. I can think at least of Connie Lukes in particular, not too long ago, I don't think it went anywhere, but starting a conversation about whether or not we should be encouraging or clamping down on home-based businesses.
Okay.
That was a conversation that happened not too long ago. I know in the process of you and I doing this show, however long that's been, we've had conversations about the city enacting seemingly antiquated, maybe even draconian laws around rooming houses and whatnot,
right.
Limiting the number of people that can live together.
You're right, especially the laws that say how many unrelated people can live in a home.
Yep.
Well, and I'm not gonna speak to the actual question because that's Tina's thing, but I think it speaks to a larger issue, which is we don't have a master plan that maps out the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of Worcester development, right? Like we have such a tiny little electorate and a relatively well-rooted group of politicians that I think find themselves speaking to the issue of the day, which oftentimes ends with which is the constituent making the most noise today, as opposed to dealing with larger issues that scale over time. So we find ourselves having a rooming house conversation because a landlord or a neighbor who happens to be a voter is upset about something without thinking through what are the potential negative consequences of that? And I'm going to guess that we had the conversation about rooming houses before the economy collapsed, and conversations about small local businesses of scale that could potentially scale were something that was deemed sexy by your average municipal government. So then we find ourselves behind the 8 ball as a city that now we have to go back and rewrite ordinance and navigate our way through bad ordinance because the entire country, if not world's economy, changed around us. That's miserable. You cannot have a city function long term if you're only going to be chasing immediate rewards and short-term gains. That's all I got. And I'm not running for anything.
I agree. There does have to be a long-term plan.
Cool. I want to ask you the third question, and then I want to maybe round back to housing for people who are going through mental illness or whatever. The Worcester Public Schools and safety in the Worcester Public Schools has probably been the issue that people have talked about this year in Worcester politics. What do you think the City Council's role should be regarding Worcester Public Schools?
I don't think the City Council has a role in the Worcester Public Schools. That's why there's a school committee. And I trust that the school committee does their job. We do some budgetary work with them, and the mayor, who is the head of the City Council, is also the head of the school committee. But honestly, I understand the violence component. There have been some issues, but I just don't think that the City Council should have really much say in that.
All right. I'll actually ask you two more things and then go back to housing. These are two questions that we've asked for several election cycles now. I want to ask them again. The first question is, how much can you bench?
My highest bench was probably 120. My most recent bench was 65.
Really? What happened?
I'm almost 50, Mike, but thanks. I don't bench as much as I used to.
You know, usually people tell us their lifetime max. They don't tell us the current amount.
I don't care. That's fine. You know what? I think the fact that I can bench 65 pounds is pretty impressive.
Good job. Good
Bill
job.
Coleman's still our,
Bill Coleman is still the record holder, who I think his lifetime max was
it was like 3 of me.
300 and something.
It was
I don't know.
2 of me. That's what it was.
We need to double check whenever we interview with him because we don't want this to be some legend that spirals out of control.
I'm happy with what I bench. I'm good.
So the other question I'd like to ask people is about The Wire, and this is because there was a successful political party in Iceland, and one of their planks on their platform was that their elected officials were willing to work with any other elected officials and form a coalition with them, as long as the other elected officials had watched all 5 seasons of The Wire. You know, and The Wire is an important show to understand cities, to understand America. But you haven't seen The Wire.
No. And you created...
There's the headline right there.
There was great shame, apparently, in the fact
another,
that I haven't watched
This
The
is
Wire.
another question, is what have you been doing besides bench pressing and watching The Wire?
Campaigning for city council, planning Start in the Street, and working.
Ultimately, this means that your consultants failed you if they didn't prep you for...
You know, the funny thing was, when I saw your list, I was like, oh, darn, he's going to ask me about The Wire. I will say one thing. Gabe Rollins will give me the entire 7 seasons or 5 seasons of The Wire, and I will watch it.
All right. Well, I hope... All right.
All right, how about this? If I should win, and I come back in 2 years to another podcast, then I will say that I will watch the entirety of The Wire before that happens.
Maybe. You know, I'm actually thinking about Sarai Rivera, who we interviewed, and didn't know how much she could bench, but was willing to arm wrestle me, but for logistical reasons didn't arm wrestle me, that after she was elected, she did come back on and arm wrestle me.
Oh, well, you need to call her out on that.
So I just want to say, that's happened. That's happened since then.
I swear, I'm a great binge watcher.
All I'm saying is, after the election, if you win, you come back and we're going to arm wrestle.
Oh.
We'll find out.
Okay.
We'll find out who's stronger. We'll find out for real.
Probably you.
We'll find out for real. So I went around back to another thing that you were saying about housing. You were talking about, you know, the need for, I would suggest, market rate housing, but also unconventional market rate housing for live workspaces and things like this, but also housing for people who don't have any money, people who are mentally ill, people who have severe addictions, people who are just trying to get by, and who somehow the existing housing system is not working for them.
Well, people need hope, Mike. People need treatment. People need to, other cities have really been able to handle their addicts without putting them in jail, getting them into treatment, funding long-term treatment, funding housing for them. Same thing with the mentally ill. Our system is completely broken. It's a Band-Aid, it's steak and Valium for 30 days or 10 days or whatever, we can afford, and then they're right back out on the streets. We need to look at other models and how other cities have handled their populations of addicts and mentally ill, and start to take cues from successful cities, and not just like I said, keep slapping a Band-Aid on it. Nothing's ever gonna get better. So we need, as a council, would need to look at what better models are and how do we start to implement them. We can't keep shoving people in hotels or just leaving them on the streets. It's not fair.
Well, I want to thank you for giving quick to the point answers to all these questions. We have plenty of time left on the show. If there's anything else you want to say, this is a good time to say it. Otherwise, we can wrap up.
I don't know. Is there anything else I want to talk about?
It's stuff I want to talk about.
All right.
So, Tina, thanks for being on the show.
Done.
Brendan Melican,
No,
your thought.
Just talking about the housing issue and that the when it comes to the substance abuse and homelessness in particular part, that's something that. So we're here in Massachusetts, right, where we like to celebrate ourselves as being these progressive, forward-thinking liberals and whatnot. Out in Utah, which I believe
Not all of us like to celebrate that, by the way.
Well, but I'm just Yeah, not all of us.
This show is Worcester's Libertarian Voice.
It is Worcester's Libertarian Voice. But you look at Utah, which I believe at last count was the most conservative state in the union.
Sure.
They've effectively ended, I think we discussed this not too long ago, effectively ended chronic homelessness because they just did the math using the housing first model and realized it's cheaper to put somebody in a home and then put the social services side to work and make sure that people have the resources necessary to get back to school, get back to work, and not worry about the housing component, right? Not constantly be writing vouchers for hotel rooms, not be shuttling people around for different school systems and even within a school district, just giving people that core component of a home, which we find removes all of the stressors that trail off of that. Like I'm not focused on getting a job or focused on getting an education or whatnot because this housing thing, one of the basic components of human life, escapes me. And it strikes me as odd that of all places Utah is able to figure that out and bring their chronic homelessness rate down to a statistical zero. And here in Massachusetts, we act as though there are no solutions to these big problems. And I think that ties back into your original housing question, right? Like we, as a nation, tend to look at development as being that was I believe it was Joe Moakley his thing about the cranes in the sky being a measure of how successful a region was. But the reality is that we have more homes empty, right, in the United States than we have homeless people, right? Like when we're talking about housing, one of the things that's fundamentally flawed is that we have a surplus of housing nationally, across the board. There's always more. If that weren't the case, then you couldn't ever find a home to live in, right? Like, prices may vary based on markets and whatnot, but we have more housing stock than we have people, yet we still have people who don't have homes. And that's just like a fundamental flaw in the logic that we use to approach some of these social issues, in that we conveniently ignore the fact that given the opportunity, data shows people will work and want to work, right? That they actually strive to better themselves given the opportunity. But you can only place so many stressors on one individual or one family before the desire to do things like chase an education or chase a job is pushed out of your head, because you're more worried about how you're going to have a roof for your family to be under or feed your family or whatnot. And again, it's kind of mind-numbing, right? Because I think some of these solutions are a lot more simple than we give ourselves as a society credit for.
I tell you, I'm so impressed at the success of Housing First, because it's the kind of thing, it looks good on paper, but it's the kind of thing that I always think, like, maybe if the pilot program works, but there's going to be some problem in scaling it up. Mm-hmm. But it's worked pretty good as these things go.
Utah may not be the biggest state, but it's a state. I mean, we're not talking about a small township or something, right? I mean, we're talking about a state, and a state was able to fix a relatively high chronic homelessness problem. Again, a conservative state where I think some of us would make the argument that the reason they had such a big homelessness problem in the first place was lack of funding for social services. But then again, just looking at the math from a traditionally conservative perspective and realize, hey, putting people in homes costs less money than providing mountains of social services, including temporary housing.
Yeah, if you're going to do social services, that's the way to do it.
After you stabilize the housing component.
Tina, your comment.
Well, and Brenda and I have talked about this before, but it costs less money to get someone treated for their mental illness or their addiction as opposed to putting them in prison and then tracking them on the long term. So again, if you give them a home, you get them the treatment that they need, you monitor them, and you support them, the slide back is so much less, and it's so much more cost efficient. I mean, yeah, that's just part of that component that we talk about.
There it is.
And we need to stop criminalizing things that aren't criminal. Mental illness is not a criminal thing. It needs to be dealt with as the disease that it is.
Well, Tina, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
Good luck in running for office. I'm Mike Benedetti. You can send your complaints to pieandcoffee@gmail.com. Also, Brendan Milliken, thanks for being on the show this week. All right, we will have many more city council interviews coming up in the coming months. The questions will be the same, only the answers will change. Bye, guys.